This particular profile is going to be a combination.
For nearly 100 years, one of history's darkest mysteries lay hidden beneath the frozen soil of Russia. The Romanovs, Russia's last imperial family, vanished in 1918, leaving behind more questions than answers. No certainty, only rumors, whispers, and legends that refused to die. Generations of historians tried to piece together the truth. Letters were examined. Witness accounts conflicted. Impostors emerged, each claiming to be the missing heir. The story stretched across centuries of power, betrayal, and revolution, woven deep into the fabric of Russian history. Then, modern science entered the investigation. DNA analysis promised clarity, but it delivered something far more unsettling. Because the evidence didn't just confirm what happened, it exposed how incomplete the story really was. Let's find out what the DNA really revealed. The night that changed history. On a cold July night in 1918, something evil happened in a basement in Russia. Tsar Nicholas II, the last king of Russia, stood with his family in a small room. His wife, Alexandra, was there along with their 4 daughters, Olga, Tatiana, Maria, and Anastasia, and their son, Alexei, who was heir to the throne. The Russian Revolution had been ongoing for over a year. People were angry at the royal family, and many wanted them gone forever. The Bolsheviks, who were the new leaders, had captured the family and kept them locked up in a house in the city of Yekaterinburg. They called this place the House of Special Purpose, but its real purpose was much darker than anyone imagined. That night, the guards told the family that they needed to move to the basement for their safety. The family believed them, but they had no idea what was about to happen to them. Nicholas carried his sick son, Alexei, down the stairs because he couldn't walk well, since he was diagnosed with a blood disease called hemophilia. Alexandra followed slowly behind, worried about her son, as always. 4 loyal servants came with them. Dr. Eugene Botkin had been their family doctor for years. Anna Demidova was the queen's maid. Ivan Kharitonov was their chef, and Alexei Trupp helped take care of the Tsar. These brave people could have run away, but they chose to stay with the family they truly loved. When they got to the basement, the guards told them that they were waiting for trucks to take them somewhere safe, but no trucks were coming. Instead, more guards appeared with guns. The leader read something from a paper, but the family couldn't understand what was happening until it was too late. What happened next was so shocking that people didn't believe it for almost 70 years. The guards opened fire on the entire family and their loyal servants. All 11 souls had passed away. Tragically, here is where the Romanov mystery really begins, because what happened to their bodies afterward would puzzle scientists for decades. The DNA evidence that finally solved this royal mystery would reveal secrets that nobody expected. The disappearing bodies. After the terrible shooting in the basement, the Bolsheviks faced a big problem. They had 11 bodies on their hands, and they needed to make them disappear completely. If people found out what really happened to the royal family, it would result in more war and anger across Russia. And so, they devised a plan to hide the bodies forever. The guards loaded all the bodies onto a truck and drove them deep into the forest. Their first idea was to throw the bodies down an old mine shaft called the Four Brothers Mine. They thought nobody would ever find them there. But when they got to the mine, they realized it wasn't deep enough. People could discover the bodies and figure out what happened. Their next plan was to pour acid on the bodies to make them harder to recognize. When that didn't work as planned, they tried to burn them. But completely burning 11 bodies without proper equipment was impossible. the Bolsheviks grew frustrated and scared. Dawn was approaching, and they were still in the forest, surrounded by evidence of their horrific crime. Finally, they decided to divide the bodies. They dug a large grave in the forest and buried 9 people there. But the 2 youngest children were placed separately in a smaller grave about 70 meters away. The men who buried the bodies swore to keep the location a secret. They covered the graves carefully and tried to restore the forest to look normal again. They returned to town and told everyone that the royal family had been moved to a safe location. For many years, most people believed this lie, but secrets of this magnitude never stay hidden forever. Some of the men involved in burying the bodies could never forget what they had done. They drew maps and wrote down clues about the graves' locations. However, they were too afraid to speak out while the Soviet government was still in power. Revealing the truth about the royal family would have put them in grave danger. The DNA analysis that would eventually solve the Romanov mystery was still decades away. Scientists hadn't even discovered DNA yet. Tragically, for nearly 60 years, the royal family's bodies lay hidden in the Russian forest, waiting for technology to catch up with history. The secret discovery. In the 1970s, while the Soviet Union still controlled Russia, a man named Alexander Avdonin worked as a geologist. His job was studying rocks and soil, but he was also deeply fascinated by history. He had heard whispers and rumors about the real fate of the Russian royal family, from secret survivors who escaped the basement to hidden heirs related to the Romanovs. Unable to ignore his curiosity, Avdonin decided to investigate on his own. He spent years examining old documents and maps and quietly spoke to elderly people who remembered stories from 1918. Slowly, he pieced together clues about where the bodies might be buried. It was dangerous work. The Soviet government did not want anyone asking questions about the royal family. Finally, in 1976, Avdonin found what he had been searching for. Deep in the forest near Yekaterinburg, he discovered a grave containing 9 skeletons. Confident that these were the remains of the royal family and their servants, he still couldn't tell anyone. If the government discovered his find, he could be arrested. Or worse. Avdonin shared the secret with only a few close friends, including a filmmaker named Gaily Ryabov. Together, they kept it hidden for 15 years. They would occasionally visit the grave to ensure it remained safe, taking photographs and making careful notes, but they had to wait for the right moment to reveal the truth. The right moment finally came in 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed and Russia became freer. Avdonin and Ryabov knew they could now reveal their discovery without fear. They contacted Russian officials and led them to the forest grave. When scientists officially excavated the grave in 1991, they confirmed exactly what Avdonin had found years earlier. There were 9 skeletons, and based on their ages and sizes, scientists concluded these were Tsar Nicholas II, Tsarina Alexandra, 3 of their daughters, and the 4 loyal servants who had died with them. But something was missing. The royal family had 5 children, not 3. The 2 youngest children were absent from the grave, raising new questions that would require modern DNA analysis. The Romanov mystery was far from solved. The DNA detective story begins. When the 9 skeletons were unearthed in 1991, scientists faced a massive challenge. How could they confirm these bones really belonged to the Russian royal family? The bodies had been buried for more than 70 years. Acid and time had severely damaged them. Traditional identification methods, like examining teeth or measuring bones, offered only limited answers. But science now had a powerful new tool that didn't exist in 1918: DNA testing. DNA is like a secret code inside every person's body, making each person unique, even decades after death. Scientists could now read this code from old bones and teeth. Dr. Peter Gill from England and Dr. Pavel Ivanov from Russia decided to attempt solving the Romanov mystery using DNA analysis. This was an incredibly difficult task. The DNA in the old bones was broken into tiny fragments, and the scientists had to be extremely careful not to contaminate their samples with modern DNA. Everything had to be perfectly clean. They worked in specialized laboratories and used new tools that had never been applied to anything like this before. The first step was figuring out who each skeleton belonged to. Through DNA analysis, they could determine which bones were from men and which were from women. They could also identify which skeletons were related as family members. Slowly, they began to reconstruct the royal family tree. The most exciting breakthrough came when they compared the DNA from the bones to living relatives of the royal family. Prince Philip, husband of Queen Elizabeth II of England, was related to Tsarina Alexandra through his mother's family. When scientists compared his DNA to that of one female skeleton, they found a perfect match. This skeleton had to be Alexandra. For Tsar Nicholas II, they located living relatives in Russia who shared his family line. However, when they tested his DNA, something extraordinary appeared. The Tsar's DNA displayed a rare feature called heteroplasmy, where two slightly different DNA patterns existed in the same person. It was so unusual that some scientists initially doubted it. To confirm the findings, Russian officials allowed scientists to test the bones of Nicholas's brother, who had died years before the revolution. Astonishingly, his DNA exhibited the exact same rare pattern. This verified the results and confirmed that the remains were indeed Tsar Nicholas II. The DNA analysis had successfully identified the royal parents and 3 of their daughters. Yet the mystery was far from over. 2 children were still missing, and their absence would lead to even more astonishing discoveries. The missing children mystery. After DNA confirmed the identities of Tsar Nicholas II, Tsarina Alexandra, and 3 daughters, one pressing question remained. Where were the other 2 children? Somewhere in the Russian forest, 2 more bodies awaited discovery. The mystery became even more confusing because experts disagreed on which daughters were missing. Russian scientists examined the 3 female skeletons and concluded that Maria was missing. Meanwhile, American scientists studying the same bones argued that it was Anastasia who was missing. Both groups were confident, yet only one could be correct. The missing son, Alexei, was easier to identify. He was the only boy among the 5 children and the youngest. Medical records revealed that he suffered from hemophilia, a blood disorder that prevented his blood from clotting properly. This left him weak and unable to walk long distances. For years after the 1991 discovery, treasure hunters, amateur archaeologists, and curious explorers scoured the Yekaterinburg forest, searching for the second grave. They used metal detectors, dug small holes, and carefully studied old maps and historical records. Some even spent their entire life savings chasing the elusive remains of the missing Romanov children. The search was complicated because the forest had changed dramatically since 1918. New trees had grown, old paths had disappeared, and roads and buildings now covered parts of the area. Locating 2 bodies across thousands of acres seemed nearly impossible, yet hope persisted. Peter Sarandinaki, who led a group called the Search Foundation, spent years organizing expeditions to locate the missing Romanov children. He believed that advanced DNA analysis would one day fully solve the Romanov mystery. But first, someone had to find those final 2 graves. The breakthrough came in an unexpected way. It wasn't professional archaeologists or treasure hunters who made the discovery. It was 3 amateur historians. They had spent years studying old documents and maps and developed a theory about where the second grave might be. In the summer of 2007, these 3 Russian men ventured into the forest, armed with simple tools, shovels, brushes, and hope. They began digging about 70 meters from the main grave site. After hours of careful work, they finally uncovered what they and countless others had been searching for decades, a discovery that would allow DNA evidence to finally solve the royal mystery once and for all. The stunning 2007 discovery. On a warm summer day in 2007, 3 amateur Russian archaeologists changed history. Sergei Plotnikov, Alexander Avdonin, the same man who had discovered the first grave in the 1970s, and Galina Gerasimova had carefully studied old maps and documents, and their theory about the missing Romanov children proved correct. What they found was much smaller than the main grave. Just 44 bone fragments and teeth scattered across the soil. The pieces were tiny and badly damaged, far more fragile than the bones in the first grave. This matched historical records, which showed the Bolsheviks had tried harder to destroy these 2 bodies first, using more acid and fire. When Dr. Sergei Pogorelov, an official archaeologist, examined the site, he confirmed that the fragments belonged to at least 2 individuals. One appeared to be a teenage girl, around 15 to 19 years old, while the other seemed to be a younger person, possibly a boy aged 12 to 15. These ages perfectly matched the 2 missing Romanov children. Even more intriguing, the archaeologists discovered 3 silver dental fillings among the teeth. In 1918, only the very wealthy could afford such dental work, providing strong evidence that at least one of these people was from a royal or noble family. The Russian government immediately took control of the site. They knew that DNA analysis would be essential to confirm whether these fragments truly belonged to the missing Romanov children. However, this testing would be far more challenging than the 1991 analysis because the remains were so badly damaged. The fragments were too small and fragile for traditional identification methods. Scientists couldn't measure the bones or study facial features like they had with the first grave. Everything now depended entirely on DNA analysis. That son, Alexei, was the key. News of the discovery spread around the world. Historians, royal family enthusiasts, and scientists all eagerly awaited the results of the DNA testing. After nearly 90 years, the world might finally learn what happened to all 7 members of Russia's last royal family. But as the DNA testing began, scientists faced unexpected challenges. The DNA analysis breakthrough. When the 44 bone fragments from the second grave arrived at laboratories in America and Austria, scientists realized they were facing their toughest task yet. The Armed Forces DNA Identification Laboratory in Maryland and the Institute for Legal Medicine in Austria worked together to analyze the tiny, damaged pieces. Dr. Michael Cobble, who led the American team, compared it to trying to read a book that had been torn into tiny pieces, burned, and buried for decades. The scientists had to use the most advanced DNA techniques available. The first step was extracting whatever DNA remained from the bone fragments. This involved grinding the bones into powder and using special chemicals to retrieve the fragile DNA. Even then, only tiny amounts of genetic material were available. To continue, the scientists used a method called PCR amplification, which creates millions of copies of even the smallest DNA fragments, giving them enough material to analyze. The scientists focused on 2 types of DNA: mitochondrial DNA, which is passed from mothers to their children, and nuclear DNA, which comes from both parents. Mitochondrial DNA testing came first. When the results appeared on their computer screens, the scientists could hardly believe what they were seeing. The DNA from both sets of remains matched perfectly with the patterns they had expected from the missing Romanov children. But the most incredible moment came when they compared the nuclear DNA from the fragments to the DNA from the 1991 grave. The computer revealed clear family relationships between the two graves. It was beyond any doubt. The fragments belonged to the two missing children of Tsar Nicholas II and Tsarina Alexandra. DNA analysis had finally solved the Romanov mystery. The scientists repeated the tests multiple times, using different techniques in various laboratories. Every single test produced the same result. All 7 members of the Romanov family had been found. However, the DNA held one more surprise, something that would forever change how scientists understood this royal mystery. The shocking truth revealed. As scientists continued analyzing DNA from both Romanov grave sites, they uncovered revelations that astonished even the most experienced researchers. The evidence didn't just solve the question of where the missing children were buried. It revealed secrets nobody had expected. First, the DNA definitively answered a question that had puzzled experts for years. Which daughter was missing from the main grave? By comparing all the remains, scientists confirmed that the missing daughter was Maria. The 3 daughters in the main grave were Olga, Tatiana, and Anastasia. Second, researchers were amazed at how well preserved the DNA actually was, despite decades of doubt. In the early 2000s, some scientists had claimed the original 1991 DNA testing was unreliable, arguing that the remains were too damaged to trust. Numerous papers were published trying to discredit the work of Dr. Gill and Dr. Ivanov. The 2007 discovery provided an opportunity to retest everything with newer, more advanced techniques. The results were remarkable. The original DNA analysis from the 1990s had been entirely correct. Scientists were able to create complete DNA profiles for all the people who died that night in 1918. They could clearly see the family relationships. Nicholas and Alexandra as parents, their 5 children, and the 4 loyal servants who died alongside them. The DNA evidence painted a complete and undeniable picture of what had happened in that basement. Surprisingly, the harsh Russian climate had actually helped preserve the DNA. The ground around Yekaterinburg freezes solid from September to April each year, providing natural refrigeration that kept the remains in far better condition than scientists had initially imagined. The DNA analysis also revealed details about the Romanov family's ancestry that historians had never known. Scientists could trace family lines back through generations, confirming relationships that had previously been only guessed from historical records. When all the testing was complete, scientists had virtually irrefutable evidence that both graves contained the complete Romanov family and their loyal servants. The centuries-old mystery that had puzzled the world for nearly 90 years was finally solved through DNA evidence, and the significance of this discovery would resonate far beyond the boundaries of history. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below with your thoughts. We'd love to hear what you think about the Romanov mystery.